What happens when a nation rebuilds from rubble, but shadows still linger on its streets? In post-war Britain, filmmakers turned the scars of conflict into gripping crime stories. These films were gritty, daring, and unafraid to stare into the darkness. Some launched careers, others quietly vanished into the fog of memory. But forgotten doesn't mean unworthy. These are 15 British post-war crime films from the 1950s that deserve a second look, starting with a shocking classic. The Blue Lamp, 1950. It wasn't just a film, it was a cultural moment. The Blue Lamp captured Britain in transition, a society desperate to restore order after years of chaos. Audiences flocked to see Jack Warner as PC George Dixon, a police officer meant to embody safety and stability. But then came the gut punch. Dixon is shot during the line of duty, a moment so startling that cinema-goers gasped out loud. For many, it felt like watching the very idea of British order crumble on screen. Directed by Basil Dearden, the film blended gritty realism with a raw emotional punch. Dirk Bogarde, in an early role, gave a magnetic performance as the young, restless criminal. His portrayal wasn't a cardboard villain, but a reflection of real anxieties youth gangs, disillusioned veterans, and restless post-war energy. The crime wasn't just about one act, but about a nation struggling to control its own future. The irony? The audience mourned Dixon so much that the BBC brought him back for the long-running television series Dixon of Dock Green. Warner became a symbol of safety, his smiling figure patrolling the airwaves for 2 decades. Meanwhile, the Blue Lamp itself slipped quietly into the background, overshadowed by the show it inspired. Today, the film stands as both a time capsule and a cautionary tale. It dared to show Britain's streets not as calm avenues, but as battlegrounds of unease. Forgotten by many, it still whispers of the years when even law and order seemed fragile. They Made Me a Fugitive, 1950. Trevor Howard wasn't your clean-cut war hero here. Instead, he played Clem, a bitter ex-serviceman who falls in with a smuggling gang. Betrayed and framed, he becomes a man on the run. This wasn't glamorous crime, it was dirty, rain-soaked, and desperate. The title itself reads like an accusation. Society promised stability, but instead left its veterans broken and abandoned. Directed by Alberto Cavalcanti, the film looked unlike anything else in Britain at the time. Cavalcanti, with roots in French cinema, brought a European sense of fatalism. Streets glistened with rain, alleyways echoed with suspicion, and every shot felt claustrophobic. It wasn't about fast-talking gangsters, it was about survival in a world that no longer seemed to have room for men like Clem. Critics admired its artistry, but mainstream audiences turned away. The tone was too grim, too steeped in bitterness. Britain wanted stories of triumph, not bleak reminders that peace could be just. As cruel as war. As American crime thrillers dazzled with style and glamour, They Made Me a Fugitive sank into the shadows. Yet the film deserves rediscovery. Howard gave one of his most layered performances, capturing the restless energy of a man who fought for a country that no longer cared. In many ways, it set the tone for a decade of crime films that dared to show the cracks in post-war life. Forgotten by the masses, it remains a noir masterwork where every shadow hides betrayal. Pool of London, 1951. London's docks were a world of fog, shadows, and secrets, and Pool of London used them brilliantly. Earl Cameron played Johnny, a Jamaican sailor, navigating both crime and romance in a city still picking itself up after the Blitz. At its core, the film was about smuggling and betrayal, but it was Cameron's subtle romance with a white woman that made it groundbreaking. At a time when Britain avoided such stories, this film quietly pushed boundaries. Directed by Basil Dearden, the movie shimmered with noir atmosphere. The docks weren't just a backdrop, they were characters themselves, grimy, alluring, and filled with danger. Camera work lingered on shadows, foghorns, and murky water, turning the city into a maze of opportunity and ruin. But perhaps its boldest move was simply casting Cameron in a central human role at a time when black actors were sidelined into stereotypes. His natural, understated performance hinted at a Britain that was changing even if audiences and critics weren't ready to celebrate it. The romance subplot was kept quiet, coded never openly acknowledged, yet its presence made the film quietly revolutionary. Over time, Pool of London was buried by more traditional thrillers. Britain, still clinging to its old image, wasn't ready to hold up a story that reflected the new reality of empire migration and change. Today, the film feels more daring than ever. It wasn't just a crime drama, it was a subtle challenge to the stories Britain wanted to tell about itself. The Long Memory, 1953. John Mills had built a career as the nation's dependable hero. But in The Long Memory, he shattered that image. Here he played Philip Davidson, a man just released from prison after serving time for a crime he didn't commit. Instead of redemption, what followed was obsession. Mills, stripped of charm, delivered a performance full of bitterness and raw desperation. Director Robert Hamer shot the film among the bleak marshes of the Thames estuary, creating landscapes that felt as broken as the people in them. Bombed-out ruins, half-built lives, endless gray horizons. It was Britain laid bare, still haunted by scars of war. The mood was closer to European noir than British optimism, a grim study of a man hollowed out by injustice. Audiences, however, weren't ready. They wanted hope, not haunting reminders of suspicion and betrayal. Critics admired the atmosphere, but the film never found lasting fame. Hamer himself, already struggling with personal battles, soon saw his career unravel. Like its director, The Long Memory faded into obscurity. But it deserves its name. The film lingers. It is less about crime itself than about its lasting cost. It asks, what happens when you're wrongly accused, when your life is stolen, when justice becomes just another lie? Mills gave one of his most daring performances, and the film stands as a chilling echo of Britain's post-war conscience. Forgotten by many, it still casts a long shadow. The Yellow Balloon, 1953. At first glance, The Yellow Balloon looked like a children's story. London streets, kids at play, a bright balloon floating in the sky. But the brightness quickly turned to darkness. A child's accident sets off a chain of events that pulls an innocent boy into the grasp of a ruthless criminal. The result? One of the most unsettling British crime films of the decade. Directed by J. Lee Thompson, who would later earn acclaim for Cape Fear, the film used expressionistic visuals to turn bomb-damaged London into a landscape of menace. Ruins weren't just scenery, they symbolized broken childhoods and fragile innocence. The East End locations gave the story raw authenticity, as if crime was seeping directly out of the rubble. William Sylvester was chilling as the manipulative criminal, a man who exploits a boy's fear and guilt. The psychological tension was relentless, showing how innocence can be corrupted when survival instincts take over. It was a far cry from the cheerful comedies Britain often preferred. Audiences found it too disturbing, too bleak. Critics praised its craftsmanship, but admitted it was a tough watch. As lighter crime capers filled screens later in the decade, The Yellow Balloon slipped into obscurity. But to revisit it now is to see one of the bravest attempts at mixing fairy tale innocence with noir dread. It reminds us that danger isn't just in smoky pubs or dark alleys. It can creep into ordinary streets and fragile choices. This forgotten film still haunts like a nightmare you can't shake. Cast a Dark Shadow, 1955. Dirk Bogarde was already Britain's brooding screen heartthrob, but in Cast a Dark Shadow, he gave one of his most sinister turns. He played Teddy Bear, a smooth-talking man who marries wealthy older women, then conveniently ensures their untimely end for inheritance. Forget dashing heroes. Bogarde was ice-cold ambition wrapped in charm. The film paired him with Margaret Lockwood, who played a sharp widow unwilling to be his next victim. Their psychological duel gave the film a gothic edge somewhere between a drawing room drama and a pulpy thriller. Behind the camera was Lewis Gilbert, who would later direct You Only Live Twice and Educating Rita. Here, he wasn't painting on a blockbuster canvas, but focusing on suffocating interiors, whispered threats, and the toxic fog of greed. Audiences in 1955 weren't quite ready for it. Too dark for mainstream. Taste too pulpish for critics, it fell into the cracks. Bogarde, meanwhile, was evolving away from matinee idol roles, choosing instead to explore complex and unsettling characters. Today, the film feels ahead of its time. It shows how post-war Britain wasn't just rebuilding homes, it was rebuilding values, and not everyone wanted to play fair. Cast a Dark Shadow is a story of charm, weaponized as poison and ambition that rots from the inside out. Forgotten by many, it still lingers like a warning. Not all shadows come from ruined streets, some come from within. The Good Die Young, 1954. By the mid-50s, crime films started experimenting with ensemble casts, and The Good Die Young was one of the boldest attempts. Imagine a roll call of talent: Lawrence Harvey, Stanley, Baker, Gloria Graham, Joan Collins, and even Richard Basehart from Hollywood. It promised glamour, but delivered something far darker. The film followed four men, each broken by post-war struggles. A boxer past his prime, a bitter office worker, a disillusioned war veteran, an American trapped in despair. Different lives, same desperation. They're drawn together by a plan for a robbery that promises salvation. But like all heist films with a moral spine, everything collapses. The robbery unravels, and so do they. Director Lewis Gilbert shot the crime sequence with sharp precision, but the real sting lay in the buildup. Each man's story revealed how ordinary frustration could curdle into recklessness. It wasn't glamorous, it was tragic. Britain didn't get Robin Hood-style bandits here. Instead, it saw men broken by disappointment, men who couldn't outrun the shadows of peace. Audiences weren't quite ready for that honesty. The film struggled, commercially dismissed as too bleak, but with distance it feels almost prophetic. Not every war hero found glory in peacetime. Not every man found happiness in prosperity. The good die. Young dared to say that sometimes peace destroys more quietly than war. That makes it one of the most overlooked crime gems of the decade. Tiger Bay, 1959. At first glance, Tiger Bay looked like another tidy British thriller, but instead of polished detectives and neat justice, it gave audiences something startling, a crime story told through the eyes of a child. Young Hayley Mills made her debut here, playing a mischievous girl in Cardiff's docklands, who accidentally witnesses a crime of passion. She forms an unlikely bond with the culprit, a Polish sailor played by Horst Buchholz. He isn't painted as a simple villain, he's wounded human, caught in a web of mistakes. Through Mills's eyes, audiences were forced into uncomfortable empathy. Directed by J. Lee Thompson, the film used Cardiff's immigrant communities and working-class streets as living backdrops. It felt real, bustling, layered with the grit of daily life. The decision to shoot on location gave it raw immediacy, and the child's perspective turned the story into something hauntingly fresh. Critics praised Mills's performance, and Buchholz found international stardom. Yet, strangely, the film slipped from cultural memory. Perhaps it was overshadowed by Mills's next big splash in Disney's Pollyanna the following year. Or maybe its mix of innocence and crime unsettled audiences who wanted clearer boundaries. Today, Tiger Bay feels astonishingly modern. It's about blurred lines, fractured morality, and the uneasy truth that people can be both guilty and kind. Forgotten by the mainstream, it's a gem waiting for rediscovery. Hell Drivers, 1957. Forget gangsters in smoky bars. Hell Drivers put its danger on the open road. Stanley Baker starred as Tom Yateley, an ex-con trying to go straight by working as a truck driver. Sounds honest enough, right? Except this trucking company was rotten to the core. Drivers were pushed into cutthroat competitions, speeding down dangerous roads and brutal races just to survive. The action was raw, trucks skidding on gravel engines, screaming lives hanging by a thread. Years before Hollywood perfected the car chase, Britain had already put rubber to road. Alongside Baker, the cast was a time capsule of future stars. Sean Connery before Bond, Patrick McGoohan at his most intense, and Herbert Lom simmering with menace. But the standout was McGoohan as the sadistic foreman, a villain who thrived on exploiting desperate men. His sneer, his cruelty, his unrelenting grip on power, he gave the film its most chilling moments. Why was it forgotten? Maybe because its world felt too ordinary. Trucking yards and rural highways didn't scream glamour. Or maybe because its message was uncomfortably clear. Exploitation wasn't hiding in shadows, it was built into the very structure of work. Today, Hell Drivers feels like a blast of nitro noir. It's furious, sweaty, and unrelenting. A howl of anger from post-war Britain, showing how survival itself could be the dirtiest crime of all. The Man Who Never Was, 1956. Not every crime film was fiction. The Man Who Never Was dramatized one of the most audacious deceptions of the Second World War. Operation Mincemeat. It wasn't a robbery or a gangster scheme. It was a story of forgery manipulation and high-stakes trickery. Clifton Webb played Ewan Montague, the intelligence officer who devised the plan. The crime? Dressing a corpse as a Royal Marine officer, planting false documents, and releasing it off the coast of Spain to trick German forces into believing an invasion would land in Greece rather than Sicily. The gamble worked, saving thousands of lives. The film played like a thriller, careful planning, suspense, and the constant risk of exposure. Webb, usually cast as urbane or icy, gave the role gravity. It was a story of crime for survival, crime turned into strategy. But despite the true-life stakes, it never secured the cultural fame of Britain's louder war epics. Perhaps the subject felt too unsettling, victory achieved not through heroism, but through deception. Today, the film holds a strange power. It reminds us that crime isn't always about greed or malice. Sometimes it's about desperation, about bending rules in the name of survival. The Man Who Never Was deserves a second look, not just as history, but as one of the most unconventional crime stories of the 50s. Night and the City, 1950. London after dark. Neon lights flickering against bomb-damaged streets, smoke curling above alleys where deals are whispered and fortunes vanish in minutes. That's the world of Night in the City, one of the most haunting British noirs of the 1950s, and a film that somehow fell into the background despite its brilliance. Directed by Jules Dassin, who had just fled Hollywood during the Blacklist era, the film carried an outsider's intensity. Richard Widmark starred as Harry Fabian, a hustler always chasing the big break that never comes. His latest scheme, muscling in on the wrestling business, spirals into a chain of betrayals and doom. Widmark's manic energy made Harry both magnetic and tragic, the perfect symbol of post-war ambition gone sour. What set Night in the City apart was its atmosphere. Cinematographer Max Green turned London into a labyrinth of shadows, fog, and flashing lights. Every street corner felt like a trap, every nightclub like a stage where desperation played out. It wasn't just crime, it was the city itself, conspiring against anyone reckless enough to dream too big. Despite critical admiration, audiences didn't fully embrace it. Perhaps it was too bleak, too unflinching. Britain wanted to believe in rebuilding, not in hustlers crushed by their own schemes. American audiences got a slightly re-edited version, further muddying its legacy. As a result, the film slipped into that odd category of being admired but rarely discussed. Today it feels like a lost masterpiece. Night in the City doesn't just show crime, it shows the cost of chasing illusions in a world that gives nothing for free. Forgotten by many, it remains one of the sharpest reminders that in the shadows of post-war London, the city always wins. Street Corner, 1953. While the blue lamp focused on the male constable, Street Corner turned the spotlight on women. This rarely remembered police procedural followed the lives of female officers in London, women who had just as much grit as their male counterparts, but were too often overlooked in popular storytelling. Directed by Muriel Box, one of the very few women directing in post-war Britain, the film mixed documentary realism with dramatic storytelling. We see the officers breaking up domestic disputes, tracking shoplifters, and facing the quiet, everyday struggles of women in uniform. Instead of focusing on one grand case, it revealed crime and justice as messy, unglamorous, and deeply human. The film dared to give women authority at a time when the screen preferred them as side characters or love interests. It also painted post-war London not as a place of heroics, but as a city where small-scale crimes and broken lives piled up just as heavily as big scandals. Audiences, however, were lukewarm. Critics dismissed it as too procedural and too ordinary. Perhaps the problem was that it was too real. Street Corner didn't romanticize law enforcement or crime, it showed the grind, and because of that, it slipped away from memory. Today it's a time capsule, quiet proof that women were already pushing boundaries in British crime cinema, even if the spotlight wasn't ready to shine on them. The Criminal, 1957. Stanley Baker owned this film. By the late 50s, he had become the face of Britain's grittier side. No smooth gentleman here, just hard stares and clenched fists. In The Criminal, he played a tough inmate navigating the brutal hierarchies of prison life. Directed by Joseph Losey, an American exile working in Britain, the film was almost too raw for its time. It portrayed prison not as a place of reform, but as a pressure cooker of corruption, violence, and deals struck in shadows. The camera lingered on cold corridors, echoing footsteps and tense standoffs. What made it stand out was its honesty. It didn't glamorize anything. It showed the unvarnished truth. Crime didn't end when the judge handed down a sentence, it just changed locations. And Baker's performance anchored it all magnetic dangerous, but also strangely sympathetic. Critics admired the intensity, but it struggled to find a broad audience. Perhaps it was too close to reality, too uncomfortable for post-war optimism. American noirs offered stylish escapism. This one offered only cold truth. But today it feels like one of the most important crime films of its decade. Losey's outsider eye cut through sentimentality, and Baker gave Britain the anti-hero it didn't know it needed. Forgotten by many, The Criminal deserves a place in any conversation about the rawest of British crime stories. The Good Beginning, 1953. Few remember The Good Beginning, but its premise was striking. Two ex-cons trying to turn their lives around, only to be sabotaged by betrayal. It was a quiet, almost melancholy take on crime, less about flashy heists, and more about the uphill battle of redemption. The film starred John McCallum and Stanley Baker, both delivering understated performances. McCallum brought a fragile sincerity, while Baker gave his usual hard edge, showing just how difficult second chances can be. The real weight of the film wasn't in big action scenes, but in small, tense conversations, men trying to escape their pasts, but finding the world unwilling to let them. The director David MacDonald leaned into realism. The camera caught dingy boarding houses, smoky cafes, and narrow London alleys. Instead of stylized glamour, it gave viewers a portrait of lives stuck in limbo. The problem? It wasn't thrilling enough for mainstream audiences. Critics called it earnest, but dull, and it quickly vanished from circulation. Yet, in hindsight, its very ordinariness feels daring. Crime stories are usually about explosions and spectacle. The Good Beginning insisted that the real drama comes from something quieter, the struggle to simply start over. Today it's rarely mentioned, but it deserves rediscovery. It dared to ask a question still relevant now. Can you ever really escape your past, or does society keep writing your story for you? The Blue Parrot, 1953. Soho in the 50s wasn't all jazz clubs and neon. Beneath the music and bright lights there were secrets, and the Blue Parrot captured that shady underworld with style. This forgotten little noir sent a New York detective across the Atlantic to help Scotland Yard untangle a string of crimes tied to a London nightclub. The result was a moody slice of post-war crime cinema that should have stood taller than it did. Directed by John Harlow, the film had all the noir staples: smoky clubs, slick crooks, and sharp dialogue. Dermot Walsh took the lead, playing the kind of fast-talking detective more often seen in American pictures. But, set against the peculiar rhythms of London, the contrast gave the film a unique transatlantic feel. The nightclub scenes oozed atmosphere, capturing Soho's reputation as both glamorous and dangerous. What made it intriguing was its raw sense of place. Unlike glossy Hollywood thrillers, The Blue Parrot leaned on London's real grit. Narrow streets, dimly lit stages, and the uneasy mix of locals and outsiders turned every scene into a reminder that post-war Britain was still struggling to define itself. It wasn't just a crime story, it was about clashing cultures and the uneasy ties between order and chaos. Yet the film faded almost immediately after release. Without big stars or a lavish budget, it was overshadowed by bigger, louder productions. Critics dismissed it as just another crime programmer, and audiences quickly forgot it. But in truth, it's a hidden gem, a compact, punchy thriller that reflects the shadows of its time. Today, The Blue Parrot deserves rediscovery. It's proof that even in the corners of low-budget British cinema, the noir spirit thrived. Forgotten by many, it still flickers with that unmistakable glow of a city that never truly sleeps. So, there you have it. 15 forgotten gems from Britain's post-war years, each one a shadowy mirror of a nation rebuilding, doubting, and redefining itself. Some are bleak, some are daring, all are worth another look. Which of these films do you think deserves a revival? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that subscribe button for more hidden history, and share this with someone who loves classic cinema. After all, the shadows of the past are never truly gone.